Perfect. All right. Last presentation of the day. Woo, we made it. So I'll try and keep everyone engaged and interested as I introduce the Nova Scotia Working Woodlands Trust today. So really nice to see a lot of familiar faces in the room and land stewards that we actively work with at NSWWT. So I'm going to give a brief outline of our organization and what we do, and as kind of the first land trust in Nova Scotia managing working woodlands. So first, I just wanted to talk about how we as an organization integrate Mi'kmaq values. So within Nova Scotia and as private landowners, we are all treaty people, and we recognize that there are some challenging relationships that come up when we're talking about private land ownership as a concept and how that reflects, particularly colonialism as well. So the conservation movement in general has benefited from the appropriation of Indigenous lands, and that lands actually weren't ceded. So ownership and title are generally colonial constructs. So within our work, we integrate practices such as two-eyed seeing, so integrating Indigenous knowledge as well as Western knowledge into land stewardship. We also look to change our language a little bit, and instead of using language like landowner, we use language like land steward. We also act to build relationships with the Mi'kmaq, alleviate barriers, and continue to have conversations. And we're also actively working with Mi'kmaq communities to explore land back. So as I present today, I would like you all to think about some of these questions. Some may resonate with you, some might not. So we're really asking, how do you value your woodlands? What does the term stewardship mean to you? How do you like to spend time in the forest? Are you concerned about what will happen to your land after your time? Maybe you're concerned about nearby land use changes or climate change. And then lastly, who will continue your stewardship legacy? So, built from a partnership of woodland stewards and conservation organizations, the Nova Scotia Working Woodlands Trust fills an important niche in private land stewardship in Nova Scotia. So many of you might know I also work for the Medway Community Forest Cooperative, and our organization was really incubated as a private land services branch to that organization. And our vision is really a healthy, resilient, forested landscape across Nova Scotia through a shared network of land stewards with a commitment to long-term stewardship. And we primarily do this through working forest easements. So many of you might be familiar with conservation easements, but these are actually filed under the Community Easements Act. So these easements are a legally binding document that's signed between us, the organization or the easement holder, and a landowner that outlines specific uses that are allowed and aren't allowed on the property. So each easement is customized to the current landowner's goals. They exist in perpetuity, and of course, this key tenet is that the land steward maintains ownership of the property. So most of you are probably familiar with conservation easements that are offered through organizations such as the Nova Scotian Nature Trust or the Nature Conservancy. And we just wanted to differentiate that our organization is really prioritizing sustainable resource use and ecological forestry. So we don't restrict commercial activities. We actually look to have a human element core to our programs. And of course, we're filed under a different act. We're filed under the Community Easements Act. And we would like to point out that residential and agricultural uses don't have to be subdivided out of the property. They are still allowed as uses within the lands. So some of the benefits we offer to land stewards within our program is really that long-term stewardship and monitoring. So we have staff that actively work with landowners to reflect your goals and also provide management planning services. So we have access to advice from these professional foresters. We offer easements, that documentation, as well as some legal support. And we provide that opportunity to retain ownership when a lot of the traditional conservation land trusts are focused on land acquisition. And of course, a core component of our work is that peace of mind that it provides you, that you know that your legacy would be maintained on that property over time. So one way that we reflect current landowner values is through zoning. So each property that we work with has typically 3 distinct zones. So residential, agricultural, working forest, and conservation. So each of these zones have different requirements, which I'll get into in a minute. But this is really the primary area where the current landowners can have influence over future practices on their property. I'll also note that we're actively working to have the conservation zones within our easements count towards Canada's protected area targets, and we recently had our first easement counted towards the Canadian Protected Areas database. So within these 3 zones, what is allowed? So the conservation zone is what you would typically think of for an easement. So, you know, allowing some activities that are non-commercial, like hiking, maybe even some trail building. Our working forest zone is really the core component of our easements. So this is where we allow ecological forestry to occur. You know, things like new road construction, small cabins, as well as restoration projects. And then the residential agricultural zone has a lot more freedom. So that's where you could build a new residence, a garage, an addition. You could also practice agriculture, land clearing, or renewable energy projects. Our easements have a cost associated with them. Obviously, we have a team of staff that's providing services. And we offset those costs through the development of an endowment fund. So often, easements typically come with some sort of cash contribution from the landowner. We are doing a bit of creative accounting and accessing endowment costs through forest carbon offset markets, as well as receiving our own independent private and government funding. So that endowment we place aside with each property that we sign an easement, which covers things like annual monitoring costs and any sort of liability costs that may occur if some sort of infraction were to happen on the property in the future. So the carbon market really exists to leverage third-party finance to offset those costs for the landowner. So right now, we're facilitating the aggregation of a landowner pool of 3,500 acres, which we've now met that goal, and we'll be proceeding with this carbon project this year. And then we're working with a third-party developer called the Climate Trust to market and sell the carbon offsets. So just to show you a little bit of how these costs are divided up, like there is some commitment that we require of our land stewards, but it's really, you know, to cover their own concepts of the easement, like hiring legal counsel, any sort of survey or subdivision costs if they do want to extract, you know, maybe future lots for development or something like that. Boundary line maintenance, we sometimes offer support for. Professional services, of course, you know, we do offer some legal advice, but we do recommend that folks work with their own lawyers. And then, of course, there's significant time and energy that goes into developing these easements as well. On our behalf, we offer complimentary site visits, the development of a baseline report for your property, a Forest Stewardship Council certified stewardship plan, and then a lot of benefits like annual visits, mapping, restoration services, that type of thing. We also work together in collaboration with the landowner service provider groups for any costs associated with or services for silviculture or harvesting. So just to highlight a little bit of our field services and some of our progress to date. So each property, as I mentioned, receives a Forest Stewardship Council certified plan that's renewed every 10 years at no cost to the landowner. We also develop what's called a baseline documentation report. So that's really to understand what are the baseline conditions of the property when it's put under easement. We also conduct annual monitoring, so every year we're going out there and visiting the property, and then we offer these services like restoration, so in particular, our hemlock woolly adalgid treatment program. We also support those logistics related to timber harvesting, and we're really just there as a partner for you to help assist in forest management. So here's a little bit of our process. So, typically we're doing, some sort of evaluation to start off with, see if your property qualifies for our program. And then we sign what is called a letter of intent. So that's really, a non-binding legal agreement to make sure that everyone understands that we're working together towards this end goal of an easement. We then visit the property, do things like a boundary line assessment, some maintenance if required. Then we do the field work associated with the baseline documentation report, work together identifying land use zoning, move to the forest stewardship plan, sign and enter the easement agreement, and then we go into kind of this ongoing reciprocal relationship where we're doing the annual monitoring and stewardship. So just to highlight our work to date and where we're working. So to date, we've signed 5 easements. So that's primarily within our Hemlock-Woolly Adalgid program. And then we're in the process of signing 13 more easements for our carbon program starting in June of this year. So you could see our office is in Caledonia. Our operations are a little bit weighted towards the west, but we are expanding eastwards and working really across the program. So we've also recently purchased our own property, about 500 acres in North Queens, bringing the total acreage under our stewardship to about 3,700 acres. So just to talk briefly about eligibility, so we have 2 kind of programs right now. We have our carbon program where we require a little bit of a larger property. So typically we're looking for something that's over 200 forested acres, that's over 50% mature. It could either be in a managed or natural state. We just require that little bit of age for the carbon value. We also have a cluster policy, so maybe you don't own 200 acres, but your neighbor who does own 200 acres is interested in an easement. You guys can cluster together. So any property that's over 100 acres and within a 20-kilometer radius of one of those larger properties can qualify. So we're actually working with quite a few landowners that have this right now, and it's a really great way to build community and resources within our programming. So if you're interested in an easement, and I had a booth out there and all of my information packages are gone, so I'm hoping there's a few of you who might be. We need your contact information, things like your property information. If you have an existing management plan, that's really beneficial for us to have. Of course, information to identify your property with. And then what you can kind of prepare for is evaluation by our organization and our staff, boundary line maintenance, land use zoning, reviewing agreements with your lawyer, and of course, investing your time into this onboarding process. So here are just a couple of the land stewards we're highlighting. Don and Sheila are somewhere in this room. Hi, Don and Sheila. So we work with a really, really great network of folks that I think, really benefit by the little community we've created within our land trust, and we really try and focus on peer-to-peer relationships and building resources and, the program in general for everyone to benefit from. So I will leave it at that. Any questions?